She walked through the mansion's mahogany doors like a loaded gun wrapped in velvet, beautiful, deadly, and aimed at the heart of a marriage already bleeding. Lena Martinez clutched her single suitcase, its worn leather handle slick with nervous sweat. The foyer stretched before her like a cathedral of wealth, marble floors, so pristine they reflected the crystal chandelier above. Oil paintings worth more than most people's yearly salaries, an air thick with the scent of jasmine and secrets. Her footsteps echoed, despite her efforts to move silently, each sound a reminder that she didn't belong here. Not yet. Clara Whitmore descended the curved staircase with the grace of a predator in pearls, her champagne-colored dress flowing like liquid gold against her porcelain skin. "Welcome to Whitmore Manor," she purred, her voice honey-sweet, but eyes sharp as winter glass. "I trust you understand the special nature of your employment here." The pause hung between them like a noose, loaded with implications Lena wasn't ready to fully comprehend. This wasn't just about cleaning rooms or serving tea. Clara had hired her for one purpose: to seduce her husband, capture his infidelity, and destroy him in the divorce proceedings that would follow. The plan was elegant in its cruel use: beauty as bait, love as leverage, and betrayal as the final blade. James Whitmore sat in his study like a king who'd forgotten he owned a kingdom, surrounded by leather-bound books that held more warmth than his 20-year marriage. The morning light filtered through heavy curtains, casting long shadows across his mahogany desk, where contracts and correspondence lay scattered like fallen leaves. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable, but his eyes held the hollow look of a man who'd been sleepwalking through his own life. When Lena knocked softly and entered with his morning coffee, he glanced up with the automatic politeness of someone who'd learned to see servants as furniture. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of years spent speaking to echoes. But something made him pause. Perhaps it was the way she moved, not with the hurried deference of typical household staff, but with a quiet dignity that seemed to fill the room. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, her uniform modest but somehow elegant on her frame. When their eyes met briefly, he saw intelligence there, and something else, a carefully guarded sadness that felt familiar. For the first time in months, James truly looked at another person. The coffee tasted different that morning, richer somehow, as if her presence had added flavor to his colorless routine. He found himself wondering about her story, about the life that had led her to his door, unaware that her story was about to become the unraveling of his own. Daniel Whitmore returned from Harvard like a storm cloud gathering strength, his presence immediately shifting the mansion's carefully maintained equilibrium. H22. He possessed his father's sharp intelligence and his mother's devastating charm. But beneath the privileged exterior lurked questions that had haunted him since childhood. The way Clara tensed when he asked about his early years. The way James sometimes looked at him with confusion rather than recognition. The way certain family photos seemed carefully curated, as if someone had edited out inconvenient truths. His BMW purred into the circular driveway just as Lena was tending to the rose garden, her movements graceful as she pruned the thorns that threatened to choke the beauty. "You're new," he said, approaching with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. His Princeton blazer was casually draped over one shoulder, his smile practiced but genuine. Lena straightened, dirt on her gloves, sun catching the gold flecks in her brown eyes. "I'm Daniel, and you are." When she introduced herself, he noticed a slight hesitation, the way she glanced toward the house as if expecting surveillance. Something about her felt different from the parade of staff who'd cycled through their lives, less eager to please, more self-contained. "Welcome to the circus," he said with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Fair warning, here is quite what it seems." He had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. Clara orchestrated the seduction like a conductor leading a symphony of destruction, each gesture calculated to push her husband toward his inevitable fall. "Make sure his wine glass never empties," she instructed Lena while arranging white orchids in the dining room, her movements precise as a surgeon's. James has always been susceptible to beauty when he's relaxed. The words dripped with disdain for her husband's perceived weakness, though Clara's own beauty had been her primary weapon for decades. She'd studied James's patterns, his preference for quiet women, his weakness for intelligence wrapped in humility, his need to feel needed. Lena was perfect, exotic enough to be exciting, vulnerable enough to appeal to his protective instincts, and skilled enough to make him feel valued. First evening's dinner was a masterpiece of subtle manipulation. Clara wore ice blue silk that made her look untouchable, while Lena served in a simple black dress that somehow made her seem more accessible than elegant. James barely glanced at his wife, but his eyes followed Lena's movements with growing interest. When she refilled his wine glass, their fingers brushed accidentally, and Clara saw the slight flush that crept up his neck. "Excellent service," James murmured, but his tone suggested he was evaluating more than just the meal. After dinner, Clara cornered Lena in the kitchen. "Perfect," she whispered, her smile sharp as a blade. "You're going to destroy him beautifully." The first real conversation happened by accident, in the space between intention and genuine connection, where Clara's careful plans began to unravel. James found Lena in the library late one evening, not cleaning, but reading a leather-bound volume of Pablo Neruda's poetry open in her lap. The soft lamplight cast a warm glow over her face as she traced the words with her finger, lips moving silently as she absorbed the Spanish verses. "You read poetry," he said, not a question but a statement tinged with surprise. She looked up, startled, prepared to apologize for overstepping, but something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't angry, he was curious, perhaps even pleased. "My grandmother used to read to me," she explained, her voice soft but steady. "She said poetry was the language of the soul." James moved closer, drawn by the honesty in her tone. "May I?" He gestured to the chair across from her. For the next hour, they discussed literature, language, the way words could capture emotions that regular conversation couldn't touch. James found himself sharing thoughts he'd never voiced about the loneliness of success, the weight of expectations, the slow suffocation of a life lived for others. Lena listened without judgment, her responses thoughtful and genuine. When they finally parted, James felt more alive than he had in years. Neither of them noticed Clara watching from the doorway, her perfectly manicured fingers clenched white around her wine glass, realizing that she'd created something she couldn't control. Daniel's world tilted on its axis when he found the DNA test results hidden in his mother's jewelry box, the numbers on the page rewriting his entire identity with clinical precision. The paternity test was dated just 3 months ago. The results, clear and devastating. James Whitmore was not his biological father. The man who'd raised him, taught him to drive, attended every graduation, shared every important moment of his life was not blood. But worse was the implication of timing. Clara had ordered this test recently, which meant she was planning something. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Lena's arrival, his father's obvious infatuation, his mother's strange encouragement of the relationship. This was a setup, and he was collateral damage. Daniel confronted Clara that evening. In her sitting room, the test results crumpled in his shaking fist. "How long have you known?" he demanded, his voice barely controlled. Clara's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the desperate woman beneath the polished exterior. "I suspected for years," she whispered, "but I never wanted to." "Couldn't what?" "Couldn't tell the truth. Couldn't be honest for once in your life." The words cut deep, but Clara absorbed them like she deserved them. "I was protecting you," she said weakly. "From what?" "From having a father who actually loves me." Daniel's laugh was bitter. "Because that's what James is, isn't it? He's my father in every way that matters, and you're using that against him." The accusation hung in the air like a blade, sharp and true. Clara realized she'd lost more than her marriage. She'd lost her son's respect, perhaps forever. Lena found Daniel in the garden at midnight, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as he processed the destruction of everything he'd believed about his family. "I know," she said simply, sitting beside him on the stone bench where he'd retreated to grieve. "I know about the test. I know about your mother's plan. I know about my role in it." Daniel looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and furious. "So you're in on it too? The whole performance, the way you look at him, The way you make him light up hits all fake." The pain in his voice cut through her like a blade. She'd grown fond of Daniel, seen in him the son she might have had in a different life. Hurting him felt like hurting herself. "It started as an assignment," she admitted, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "Your mother hired me to seduce your father, to give her grounds for divorce. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being fake. What I feel for James is real. What he feels for me is real. I never meant for it to happen, but I can't pretend it didn't." Daniel studied her face in the moonlight, searching for deception and finding only honest pain. "You love him," he said finally. "I do," she replied without hesitation, "and I think that's the one thing your mother didn't plan for." They sat in silence, two people caught in the crossfire of Clara's war, before Daniel spoke again. "Then we have to protect him. Both of us. Whatever happens next, we protect him from the worst of it." Richard Ashford, Clara's divorce attorney, sat across from her in his downtown office like a vulture in Armani, his eyes bright with the scent of billable hours and bitter victory. "You have everything you need," he said, spreading photographs across his mahogany desk like tarot cards predicting destruction, adultery, emotional abandonment, betrayal of the marriage vows. "With James's assets, you're looking at a settlement that will make you one of the wealthiest women in the state." Clara studied the images of her husband's happiness with detached fascination. In every photo, James looked more alive than he had in years. Even caught in infidelity, he radiated a contentment she'd never been able to give him. "There's just one problem," Ashford continued, his tone carefully neutral. "James is a beloved figure in this community. Respected businessman, philanthropist, devoted father. If we paint him as a cheating husband, we risk a public relations nightmare. And if the affair appears to be love rather than lust, ... He let the implication hang in the air. A man who cheated for sex was a villain. A man who cheated for love was sympathetic. "We need to destroy her credibility," Clara said quietly. "Make her look like a gold digger, a seductress, someone who targeted him deliberately." Ashford nodded approvingly. "Now you're thinking like a winner. Character assassination is an art form, and I'm a master artist." As Clara left his office, she felt the last vestiges of her humanity falling away. She was about to destroy not just her husband, but an innocent woman whose only crime was loving him. The thought should have stopped her. Instead, it fueled her rage. The explosion came on a Tuesday morning over breakfast, when Clara finally unleashed 20 years of repressed fury in the sunlit dining room that had once been their neutral ground. "I know about your little affair," she said, her voice calm as poison honey as she buttered her toast. James froze mid-sip of coffee, his cup rattling against a saucer as he set it down. Daniel looked up from his phone, immediately alert to the shift in atmosphere. Lena, serving fresh fruit, went statue-still by the sideboard. "I know about the secret conversations, the stolen kisses, the way you look at her like she's your salvation." Clara's voice rose with each word, 20 years of buried resentment pouring out like lava. "Did you think I was blind? Did you think I wouldn't notice my own husband falling in love with the help?" James's face went white, then red, then something beyond color. "Clara, no," she screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. "You don't get to explain. You don't get to justify. You took vows, James. You promised to love and honor me, and you threw it all away for a woman who's young enough to be our daughter." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to wound. Daniel stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Mother, stop." But Clara was beyond stopping. She'd been holding this rage for too long, and now that it was free, it consumed everything in its path. Lena stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think we should talk privately." Clara turned on her like a rabid animal. "You don't speak. You don't get to speak. You came into my home, you destroyed my marriage, and now you want to negotiate." The scene was spiraling out of control, and everyone in the room knew it was only the beginning. The truth came out in fragments, like shattered glass reflecting distorted images of a family that had never been what it seemed. "You want to know about vows?" James said, his voice deadly quiet as he stood to face his wife. Let's talk about the vows you broke 22 years ago when you were sleeping with Marcus Stone while we were engaged." The words hit the room. Like a thunderbolt, Daniel's face went white. Lena's breath caught. Clara's mask of righteous fury cracked and fell away, revealing the panic beneath. "You think I didn't know?" James continued, his voice gaining strength. "You think I didn't figure it out when the dates didn't match? When Daniel's eyes weren't mine? When you flinched every time I tried to be close to you?" "James, please," Clara started, but he was beyond stopping. 22 years, Clara, 22 years, I've loved a son who wasn't mine, and stayed married to a woman who's been lying to me since our wedding day. 22 years I've been faithful to someone who never was. The revelation hung in the air like smoke, choking everyone in its path. Daniel looked like he might be sick. "You knew," he whispered. "You knew I would anyway." James turned to him, his expression softening. "You are mine, son. DNA doesn't make a father. Love does. Choice does. Every day I chose to be your father was the best choice I ever made." Clara watched her world crumble, seeing the love and respect in Daniel's eyes transferred from her to James, watching the man she'd taken for granted reveal a depth of character she'd never appreciated. "I wanted to tell you," she said weakly. "Wanted to ... You wanted to control me," James said sadly. "You wanted to keep me trapped in a lie so you could live with yours." "Well, I'm done living lies, Clara. I'm done pretending we have a marriage worth saving." In the aftermath of the explosion, James found Lena in her room, packing her few belongings with mechanical precision, her face streaked with tears she'd finally allowed herself to shed. "You're leaving," he said, not a question, but a statement, heavy with loss. She looked up, and he saw his own pain reflected in her eyes. "I have to," she whispered. "I can't stay here. Not after what just happened." Not knowing what I was hired to do, the weight of her deception hung between them like a wall. "I accepted money to seduce you," she continued, her voice breaking. "I took payment to destroy your marriage. How can you ever trust me after that? How can you ever believe that what we have is real?" James stepped closer, his hand reaching out to cup her face. "Because I know you," he said simply. "I know the woman who reads poetry in the library, who tends my garden with such care, who listens to my thoughts. I know the woman who fell in love with me despite being paid not to. That's who you are, Lena. Not the role you were hired to play, but the person you chose to become." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes against the pain. "But your family, your son Daniel understands," James interrupted. "He understands that sometimes love comes from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the greatest betrayals lead to the most profound truths." "I love you," she said, the words torn from her soul. "I love you, and it's destroying everything." "No," James said firmly, pulling her into his arms. "It's saving everything. For the first time in 20 years, I'm choosing love over obligation, truth over convenience. Stay with me, Lena, not as my employee, not as Clara's weapon, but as yourself. Stay and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." The divorce proceedings began like a medieval siege, with Clara's attorney, Richard Ashford, wielding subpoenas like weapons, and James's lawyer, Sarah Chen, building defenses from truth and precedent. The courthouse became a battlefield where private pain was dissected in public forums, where love letters were read aloud as evidence, where the most intimate moments of a marriage were reduced to legal strategies and billable hours. Clara sat rigid in her designer suit, her face a mask of controlled fury, while James appeared wary but resolute, no longer the broken man he'd been just months ago. Lena waited in the hallway, barred from the proceedings but feeling every moment of the assault on the man she loved. "Mrs. Whitmore," Ashford intoned during Clara's testimony, "can you describe the emotional devastation you've experienced discovering your husband's affair?" Clara's performance was flawless, theirs, at precisely the right moments, voice breaking with calculated vulnerability. 20 years of marriage," she said, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. 20 years of love and devotion, thrown away, for a woman young enough to be our daughter." But when Sarah Chen cross-examined her, the facade began to crack. "Mrs. Whitmore, were you aware that your husband knew about Daniel's paternity?" The question hit like a bomb. Clara's composure shattered, and in that moment, The courtroom saw, not a grieving wife, but a woman whose deceptions had finally caught up with her. James testified with quiet dignity, speaking of loneliness, of years of trying to save a marriage that had been built on lies, of finding unexpected love in the most complicated circumstances. "I don't excuse my actions," he said, looking directly at Clara, "but I won't apologize for finding happiness with someone who sees me as I truly am." The battle was far from over, but the first shots had been fired, and the casualties were mounting. On both sides, the story broke in the society pages like a tsunami of scandal, transforming private pain into public entertainment for a city hungry for the downfall of its elite. "Whitmore Manor Scandal, a Fair Rocks prominent family," screamed the headlines, accompanied by paparazzi photos of James and Lena stolen during their most private moments. The narrative was crafted with surgical precision: the betrayed socialite, wife, the philandering businessman, the mysterious maid who'd destroyed a 20-year marriage. Lena's face appeared on magazine covers with speculative captions about gold digging and homewrecking, while James was portrayed as either a victim of seduction or a pathetic older man trading his wife for a younger model. The invasion of privacy was total and merciless. Reporters camped outside Whitmore Manor, following Daniel to his college classes, ambushing Lena at the small apartment she'd rented downtown. Her past was excavated and sensationalized: her family's struggles, her mother's illness, her desperate need for money that had led her to Clara's door. The media machine transformed her from a complex woman, making impossible choices, into a caricature of predatory femininity. James watched the coverage with growing horror, seeing the woman he loved reduced to tabloid fodder while his own reputation crumbled in real. Business partners began distancing themselves. Social invitations dried up, and the charitable boards he'd served on for decades quietly asked for his resignation. "This is what she wanted," he told Sarah Chen during a strategy meeting. "Clara knew this would happen. She's not just destroying our marriage, she's destroying our lives." But in the eye of the storm, James made his choice. He stood by Lena publicly, appearing at her side despite the cameras, making it clear that his love was worth more than his reputation. The gesture was brave, romantic, and possibly foolish. Time would tell which. Daniel's press conference was unscheduled, unscripted, and utterly devastating to his mother's carefully constructed narrative of victimhood. Standing in the sunlight outside the courthouse, microphones thrust toward him like weapons, Daniel Whitmore looked directly into the cameras and told the truth. "My mother has portrayed herself as the victim of my father's infidelity," he said, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "But the real victim here is my father, who spent 22 years raising another man's child because he's too good a man to abandon a son who needed him." The reporters erupted in a frenzy of questions, but Daniel continued with devastating precision. "James Whitmore is not my biological father, but he's the only father I've ever known. He's the man who taught me to ride a bike, who attended every school play, who sat beside my bed when I was sick. He knew the truth about my parentage, and he chose love over DNA. That's the kind of man he is." Daniel's voice broke slightly, but he pressed on. "My mother hired Lena Martinez to seduce my father, to create the very affair she's now using to destroy him. But what she didn't count on was that my father would find genuine love with someone who sees his worth, someone who values him the way he deserves to be valued." The revelation sent shockwaves through the media coverage. Clara's victimhood narrative crumbled in real time as the public realized they'd been manipulated. Social media exploded with commentary about DNA versus love, about the ethics of Clara's scheme, about the courage of a son standing up for his father. Daniel's stand didn't just change the public perception, it changed the legal landscape. Clara's case, built on sympathy and outrage, suddenly looked like the revenge plot it had always been. Clara's world collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, each revelation stripping away another layer of the life she'd built on lies and manipulation. Sitting in her attorney's office, surrounded by legal documents that now seemed useless, Clara watched her strategy crumble on live television as Daniel's press conference played on repeat. "Your son just destroyed our case," Ashford said bluntly. The public sympathy we were counting on, gone. The narrative of you as the wronged wife, shattered. We need to settle, and we need to settle fast. But Clara wasn't ready to surrender. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of playing the perfect wife, 20 years of swallowing her pride and her dreams. It had to count for something. What if we expose her past? She asked desperately. Dig deeper into her background, find something that proves she was a professional seductress, that James wasn't her first mark. Ashford shook his head. We tried that. She's clean. Before her mother's illness, she was a graduate student, a teaching assistant, a published poet. She's not some femme fatale. She's a woman who made a desperate choice and found unexpected love. That's not a crime. It's a romance novel. Clara felt the walls closing in, her carefully constructed world crumbling brick by brick. The money, the status, the respect toll of it was slipping away, and she was powerless to stop it. That night, alone in the mansion that no longer felt like home, Clara stood in her bedroom and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, hollow-eyed, desperate, aged beyond her years by bitterness and regret. She'd won the battle, but lost the war, and in the process, she'd lost herself. The question now was whether there was enough left of Clara Whitmore to rebuild, or if she'd sacrificed too much of her soul for revenge. The evening James and Lena spent in her small apartment, away from the mansion and the media circus, was like stepping into an alternate universe where love was simple and truth was possible. Her apartment was modest but warm, filled with books and plants and the soft glow of lamplight. They cooked dinner together, something they'd never been able to do in the mansion, where roles and expectations dictated every interaction. James chopped vegetables while Lena prepared pasta, their movements around each other easy and natural, like they'd been sharing space for years instead of months. I never thought I'd find this, James said quietly, watching her stir sauce with the same care she'd once used to tend his roses. This peace, this feeling of being home, I never thought I deserved it, Lena replied, her voice soft but honest. I spent so long just trying to survive, to take care of my mother, to make ends meet. I never imagined I could have something like this, someone who sees me, who values me for who I am. They ate by candlelight, talking about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears without the weight of the outside world pressing down on them. For a few hours, they weren't the scandal-ridden businessman and the controversial maid. We're simply two people who found each other against all odds. Whatever happens with the divorce, whatever the newspapers say, whatever people think, James said, reaching across the table to take her hand. I want you to know that loving you has been the most honest thing I've done in years. You saved me, Lena, not from Clara, not from the marriage, but from the man I was becoming, someone who'd forgotten how to feel. In the soft light of her apartment, surrounded by the simple evidence of a life lived with integrity, James understood that he doesn't shout, he poisons with charm and speaks in sentences, meant to bruise without bleeding. The morning sun caught Mr. Malik's tailored suit like liquid mercury as he emerged from Clara's private garden entrance, his presence a calculated violation of boundaries. Lena spotted him first through the kitchen window, her hands freezing mid-drinks on the crystal glasses. His smile wasn't warm, it was predatory, the kind that promised secrets and delivered wounds. The devil wears lotion, I swear, Tasha muttered, her voice carrying the weight of intuition that comes from years of reading people's intentions. The air itself seemed to thicken as Clara appeared, champagne flute in hand, her urgency barely contained beneath a veneer of hospitality. She's still here, Clara whispered to Malik, her words sharp as broken glass, still bending this house toward her will. Malik's response was surgical in its precision. Everyone has a weakness, usually someone they love, or someone they're afraid to disappoint. His eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a chess player who'd already seen checkmate. When he cornered Lena in the hallway that evening, his whisper carried the weight of a threat wrapped in silk. You've built something. Impressive, but one wrong detail and it all evaporates. The house held its breath, sensing the storm gathering in the spaces between words, knowing that some battles are fought not with weapons, but with the careful placement of doubt. Some battles aren't fought with fists or fury, they're won with elegance sharpened by truth. Lena entered the study the next morning carrying not tea, but revolution disguised as invitation. The acceptance letter from the cultural center crackled between her fingers like captured lightning. "I'm performing my original poem," she announced, her voice steady as bedrock. "First time publicly. The world needs to hear my voice outside these walls." Mr. James looked up from his papers, something shifting in his expression, surprise giving way to pride. The house seemed to exhale as Lena moved through it with new purpose, placing fresh flowers in the foyer, not because anyone demanded it, but because color mattered when light returned. Her conversation with Tasha about launching a staff journal sparked something electric in the air. "Everyone here has a past," Lena said. "Why not let it speak?" That evening, gathered around the fireplace, Lena's voice filled the room with words that rewrote the very atmosphere. "I wasn't built to decorate rooms. I was born to rearrange them. And if my bloodline won't hold me, my story will." The flames danced higher, as if responding to the power in her declaration. Clara watched from the shadows, her champagne glass trembling in her manicured grip. This wasn't the maid she'd hired. This was the movement she'd always feared. The moment when the oppressed stop asking for permission and start taking their space. When identity cracks, some crumble, others rebuild with sharper edges. The DNA envelope sat on Mr. James's desk like a loaded gun, its contents having detonated Daniel's understanding of himself 2 days prior. He'd spent hours in the garden, where childhood memories lived, wrestling with the revelation that biology and belonging weren't synonymous. The grass beneath his feet remained unchanged, but everything else had shifted seismic proportions. "I read it," Daniel said, walking into the study with the confidence of someone who'd found solid ground after an earthquake. "And I decided it doesn't change the man who taught me integrity." His voice carried the weight of deliberate choice, each word a brick in the foundation of his rebuilt identity. Mr. James's eyes missed it, but Daniel continued, "I'm not forgiving. I'm choosing truth over legacy, and you're part of mine. Paper or not." Later, confronting Clara on the balcony, Daniel's words cut through years of careful deception. "You lied to protect yourself, not me." The afternoon light caught the tears. Clara refused to shed, her world of control crumbling like sandcastles at high tide. "I gave you the world," she whispered. "You gave me your version of it," he replied, his voice carrying the finality of someone who'd found his own truth. That evening, joining Lena in the kitchen's warm glow, Daniel spoke with the wonder of someone discovering their own voice. "I thought truth would ruin me, but maybe it gave me back my voice." Lena smiled, her response simple but profound. "Then speak louder. It's not the shout that haunts, it's the sound no one hears but you." Clara's bedroom, once a sanctuary of rosewater and silk, now echoed with the hollow ring of a crown worn by a dethroned queen. The velvet curtains hung like funeral shrouds, and the ornate mirror reflected not elegance, but the raw exhaustion of someone fighting a war she'd already lost. Beneath her door, whispers stirred, not from others, but from her own conscience, finally demanding audience. The wine glass remained untouched, its contents growing warm like her resolve had grown cold. She opened the vanity's secret drawer, fingers trembling as they traced love letters from Mr. James, written when their marriage still held promise. "You make silence bearable," one read, the irony cutting deep as silence now served as her prison. Footsteps passed her door, Lena's purposeful stride, Daniel's newfound confidence. Tasha's humming returned. The house had found its rhythm again, but Clara was no longer dancing to it. Standing at her door, she looked out into the empty hallway where no audience waited, no validation lingered. The woman who'd once commanded attention with a glance now whispered to shadows, "I used to be the storm." But storms don't last, and Clara had become something far more tragic, the echo of thunder, the memory of power, the whisper of what once was. Regret doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It hums from the walls, sings through the spaces between what was and what could have been. She didn't write to be noticed. She wrote to be remembered. The cultural center's soft lighting bathed folding chairs filled with expectant faces as Lena stood behind the microphone, her heart percussion against her ribs. The audience wasn't massive, but it was hers. Local poets, teachers, neighbors, and in the front row, Mr. James in his crisp blazer, Daniel beside him, steady as stone, Tasha beaming like stage lights from the third row. Her voice found its wings as she began. I was told to enter rooms quietly, but my silence taught me rhythm. The words flowed like water, finding its course, each line carving deeper into the truth of her experience. I learned that family isn't always blood, but bruises passed down through who loves loudest. The room leaned in, breath held, as her poem built toward its crescendo. I am not apology. I am not accident. I am voice. I am version. I am volume finally turned up. The final words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread through the hushed audience. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, pregnant with recognition and respect. Mr. James stood slowly, not applauding, but honoring, his movement a benediction. Clara's absence spoke volumes, but Lena didn't notice. Tonight belonged to her words, her truth, her choice to be heard. The healing that followed wasn't loud. It was the quiet exhale of honesty, finally given space to breathe. Sometimes recognition doesn't arrive with fanfare, it shows up holding a door you didn't realize was locked. The woman in the navy trench coat approached like destiny wearing glasses, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. That poem, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who recognized power when she heard it. I'm editor-in-chief of Roots and Rain. We publish voices born in fire. Yours belongs in print. Lena's fingers tightened around her lukewarm cider, the paper cup crinkling like her disbelief. I've never submitted to anything, she admitted, the words carrying the weight of someone who never imagined her voice could travel beyond these walls. The editor's smile was warm but professional. Then let me be the first person you submit to without needing to change who you are. Back at the mansion, the business card sat beside Lena's journal like a passport to possibility. Tasha's excitement filled the kitchen. Girl, your words escaped these walls. You're not just free, you're seen. Mr. James's pride was quiet but palpable, his nod carrying the weight of recognition. Daniel offered soft congratulations before retreating. Finally, understanding she was building something beyond affection, Clara watched from her upstairs window as Lena walked through the garden, recognizing the calm that follows breakthrough. This wasn't just a performance, it was a passport. And Lena was headed beyond the mansion toward legacy, toward the life she'd written for herself in whispered poems and midnight journals. Not all goodbyes are dramatic. Some are sacred. The mansion breathed differently that final morning, its silence born not of tension, but of change, acknowledged and accepted. Lena moved through rooms she'd once feared, her fingers trailing along banisters she'd polished as a servant, but now touched as an equal. Doors that had once been barriers now opened freely beneath her hand, each threshold a memory transformed. Her suitcase was modest, one bag, one notebook, one truth finally given form. In the study, Mr. James waited with the dignity of someone who understood the weight of goodbyes. Thank you, Lena said, her voice steady, not for rescuing me, but for never asking me to shrink. His single nod carried years of unspoken understanding. In the kitchen, Tasha's embrace was fierce. You changed the air here. Don't stop doing that wherever you go. Daniel met her at the gate, his words carrying the weight of someone still learning to speak his truth. If I ever find courage again, it'll be because you showed me where to look. Clara didn't come down, but her silhouette filled the upstairs window. Not angry, not bitter, just smaller than the goodbye she couldn't control. Lena stepped into sunlight, the breeze curling around her braid like a benediction. No applause, no drama, just steps away from a house she hadn't just survived, she'd redefined. The truest goodbyes aren't tearful. They're rooted, making leaving feel like arriving. Endings don't always come with closure. Sometimes they arrive with permission. The bus hummed steadily down the tree-lined road as Lena sat near the window, her journal pressed against her chest like a talisman. No pages torn, no entries crossed out, just her words, untouched and ready to meet the world. She didn't glance back, not once. The mansion wasn't behind her. It was beneath her now, like a chapter that knew it had been. Read thoroughly. Her phone buzzed with destiny disguised as notification. We'd love to feature your full piece in the next issue. Also, would you consider joining our editorial board? Lena smiled, not wide, not surprised. Just arrived. The cafe where young poets gathered welcomed her like home she'd never known she was seeking. You're Lena, right? That piece about inheritance changed me. Back at the mansion, life continued its quiet revolution. Clara stared at the empty guest wing, keeping one of Lena's poems on her desk, never quoted, but read more than once. Tasha rearranged dinner without instruction, the staff journal growing with stories finally given voice. Daniel visited Mr. James with new openness, their conversations carrying the weight of chosen family. Lena didn't break the house. She freed herself from it. In her new apartment overlooking the park, she sat with her journal open, watching life move like poetry in motion. She'd finally built something no mansion could offer, a home in herself, where silence meant peace, not oppression, and where her voice could ring clear as cathedral bells in the morning air.